Dorothy and Tony board a train to Amsterdam. They argue because Tony believes Dorothy has hidden or sold his golf clubs, while she insists she hasn't seen any clubs. Tony loses his temper and starts chasing Dorothy, who locks herself in the bathroom. The conductor tries to stop Tony but gets punched. Through the door the man threatens Dorothy, saying she's finished if the clubs aren't found. Once the danger passes, Dorothy exits the restroom and apologizes to the conductor. Meanwhile Tony returns home. Dorothy arrives later and hesitantly calls out to him but finds only chaos. Tony has trashed the place and ruined all her clothes. Worst of all, he has also abused her dog, Pluto. At the same time, Petula, dressed lavishly, watches as her boyfriend Brian McMinn argues with his older brother Ronnie over business. Eventually Brian storms out in a rage and yells at Petula to get in the car. Dorothy is determined to start a new life far away from Tony, the dealers and everything else. She packs her things but all her clothes are stained with paint. Still resolute, she leaves with her dog. The worst part is that Tony has taken all of Dorothy's money. But out of pity, a kiosk vendor at the bus station gives her some tobacco and a pack of chocolate candies for free. Suddenly, just before Dorothy boards the bus, her dog Pluto starts barking and runs off. Dorothy chases after him, while Brian is beating Petula. Pluto attacks him. When Dorothy tries to intervene, Brian hits her too and then goes back to attacking Petula. Dorothy can't just stand by and hits Brian with a metal pipe. He collapses unconscious. Dorothy and Petula stare at each other in shock. Petula needs time to catch her breath. They smoke together. Dorothy suggests they put Brian in the car and take him home, but Petula can't drive. The women drag Brian together. Petula refuses to call the police. If Brian ends up in jail, she'll lose everything, her home and money. Besides, Petula works for his older brother. The women barely manage to get Brian to Dorothy's place. He starts vomiting. They lay him in the bathtub. The house is a mess. Dorothy wants to help Petula and lets her stay for now. She's missed her bus, but that no longer matters. At some point the women start laughing hysterically, though it's clear Petula is on the edge. In the middle of a breakdown, Petula blames herself, telling Dorothy she just wanted to get her passport to visit her mother. That's what made Brian lose it, but she believes he only acts like this because he loves her. Dorothy gives her new friend a stylish haircut, though Petula doubts Brian will like it. Meanwhile in the bathroom, the man regains consciousness disoriented. He falls and starts having a seizure. Petula tries to help, but he dies in her arms. The woman panics. Dorothy desperately tries to revive him, but it's no use. Morning comes. The women try to figure out what to do next. Dorothy realizes the police will figure it all out and she'll spend years behind bars. But all she wanted was to save Petula. Suddenly Brian's phone starts ringing. Dorothy asks Petula for a favor in return. She must go to work and act as if nothing happened. The women drag the body onto the balcony. Clearly Petula can't show up to work looking like this, so Dorothy gives her some clothes. They plan to make it seem like Petula is trying to reach Brian but can't get through. She thanks Dorothy for stepping in last night and gives her some money to buy new golf clubs for Tony. Maybe that will finally calm him down. At the office, Ronnie is furious that Brian still hasn't shown up. Petula says she has no idea where he is. Meanwhile, Dorothy prepares to erase all traces of the crime. Petula pretends to be worried when she hears that the police found Brian's abandoned car. Still, she tells Sheena, the secretary, that Brian is probably just passed out somewhere drunk. Petula rushes to inform Dorothy of what she knows. While talking to Dorothy on the phone, she pretends she's calling the hospital. Ronnie is standing nearby and finds it all suspicious. Dorothy plans to stage everything as a tragic accident. She meets Petula at the beach. The girl mentions that Brian had a secret hideout where he used to escape on his yacht to hide from his brother. They can make it look like he just fell. Meanwhile, Ronnie is still searching for his missing brother, but so far all he finds is Petula's passport. Things don't go according to plan when the dog decides to have a bite of Brian. Now there's no way anyone will believe he just fell. Confused, Dorothy calls Petula from Brian's phone and thanks her for the dresses and everything else. The women wish each other good night. Dorothy realizes she wants more. The next morning Petula is woken by the doorbell. Standing on the threshold is Detective Inspector George Heber. Flirting openly, Petula invites him inside. It turns out that Detective Heber plays golf with Ronnie. Trying to keep it together, Petula says she last saw Brian on Tuesday evening. Supposedly she got drunk and went to bed, while Brian stayed up. Seeing the bruise on her face, the detective suspects she's not telling the whole truth. Maybe she snapped and ended Brian's life. Petula indignantly replies that such things shouldn't be said, not even as a joke. As she opens the mail, she finds a finger in an envelope and recoils in horror. Among other things, the detective also finds a note with a phone number inside the envelope. While Petula smokes heavily, Detective Heber searches the house but finds nothing suspicious. The number belongs to Brian's mobile. The detective urges Petula to call it, saying it's the only way to find out Brian's condition. And so Petula makes the call, which is actually part of the plan. Dorothy says that if Brian's brother wants him back, he'll have to pay a ransom. Petula plays along, telling the detective the kidnappers want $1 million, or Brian dies. The women hope to escape somewhere they can't be found, but they need a lot of money to do that. The detective wants the kidnappers to provide proof that Brian is alive. For example, something only Brian and Petula would know. Of course, Petula gives the right answer, and Detective Heber is convinced Brian really was kidnapped and is still alive. Or at least he pretends to be convinced. When the detective shows the finger to the pathologist, the expert confirms that it belonged to a corpse, not a living person. Detective Heber visits Ronnie McMinn and informs him about the kidnapping but doesn't mention that Brian is likely dead. The detective asks directly if Brian could have staged his own kidnapping or sacrificed a finger just to get money. Ronnie says that's out of the question. George Heber says the ransom amount is $2 million, it's clear he wants a cut of the money too. Next, Heber drops by Petula's workplace, where she continues playing dumb. Ronnie corners Petula in the elevator to speak frankly, away from prying eyes. He doesn't really believe Brian is still alive, and Ronnie now considers Petula to be his by right. To his colleagues, Heber says everything points to Ronnie dumping his mistress and fleeing. That way he hopes to prevent the case from moving forward. Meanwhile, Petula tries to learn how to drive, recalling Brian's lessons, always full of insults and threats. Dorothy doesn't know how to drive either. Together the women nearly drive the car straight into the water. Then they laugh their hearts out, genuinely enjoying themselves for the first time in ages. But the fun is cut short by the sudden arrival of Tony, who has already seen the body. Dorothy says it's her friend Petula's boyfriend, who was in a car accident. Tony's only there to pick up his golf clubs and substances. He's in withdrawal, feeling awful. Dorothy threatens him with a knife, demanding he take what he needs and leave. But Tony was only stalling to pull a gun from his bag. If Dorothy doesn't drop the knife right now, the dog is finished. And Dorothy drops the knife. Tony demands to know what's going on. Petula explains how Dorothy saved her, but Tony knows that's not the whole truth. The women are forced to tell him about the ransom. In exchange for keeping quiet, Tony demands a cut, exactly 1/3. Petula can't just stand by while Tony bullies Dorothy, so she knocks him out, repaying the favor for saving her life. Heber tries to call Brian's phone again, but there's no answer. Petula ties Tony up. To avoid suspicion, she has to go to work, but she wants to make sure Dorothy can handle things. She also plans to take the injured dog to the vet. While Detective Heber searches for any kind of lead, Dorothy waits with the gun in hand for Tony to wake up. Petula takes Pluto to the veterinary clinic, leaves money and rushes out. When Tony regains consciousness, he tries to convince Dorothy to take him to the hospital. He's losing blood fast. Dorothy, with exaggerated sweetness, tells him he'll be in the hospital soon. Meanwhile, Tony tries to remind her of all the good moments they once shared. Neither Heber nor Ronnie knows where Brian really is, or rather where his body is. Or maybe they do suspect something? Heber burns all the evidence so that nothing can trace back to his interest in getting Ronnie to pay the ransom. Deep down, Petula is still waiting for Brian, even though he was often cruel to her. At night, Detective Heber breaks into Petula's house and says he can put her in prison. He's holding a shotgun. Heber is still unmarried, but he's always wanted a wife like Petula. She is, in his words, a perfect creature. After saying this, Heber leaves. Petula immediately calls Dorothy, but the phone is turned off. Suddenly Ronnie appears and tells her to get back in bed and get some rest. She needs to be well rested for when Brian returns, after the ransom is paid. Terrified, Petula obeys. The next morning, bank employees arrive at Ronnie's office with the cash. Dorothy picks up her dog from the clinic. Her pet is the only thing that brings her joy. Meanwhile, wounded and tied up, Brian tries to escape. Ronnie hands the money over to the detective and makes him promise to teach Brian's kidnappers a lesson. Heber promises he'll take care of it. Petula realizes that the detective is playing his own game, making Ronnie believe the kidnappers demanded twice the real amount. The detective pretends to call a SWAT team, but in reality he's calling a massage parlor. Then Heber puts Petula in a taxi with the money, supposedly so she can meet the kidnappers face to face, as they requested. Ronnie wants to go with her, since it's about his brother, but Heber refuses and asks Ronnie to trust him. Ronnie knows Heber is lying and grabs a gun. At the arranged location, Petula hides all the money in a bag strapped to Pluto, just before Heber arrives. In a rage, Heber cuffs her to a wall and rushes after the dog. All of this is witnessed by the vendor at the bus station kiosk. Despite the situation, he thinks Petula is the most beautiful creature in the world. The dog leads Heber to Dorothy's house. They aim their weapons at each other. But Dorothy stands no chance against an experienced detective, so she follows his command to drop the gun. Thinking Brian is lying alive under the blanket, Heber fires several times and grabs the bag of money. But then Ronnie appears with a gun and shoots, only to discover it's not loaded. Tony's shotgun, however, is loaded, and he takes Heber's life. Believing Tony is involved in Brian's kidnapping, Ronnie shoots him dead. But Ronnie knows it was actually Petula and her friend behind it all. Before he can fire again, Petula appears and takes Ronnie's life, saving Dorothy's life. The women embrace. Then, wasting no time, they escape by train to another country with all the money. On the train, Dorothy notices a familiar face, the very conductor Brian once punched.